How did the early church respond to the death of the first Christian generation? Although many of the bedrocks of the Christian faith may seem obvious in retrospect, the early church had to create systems to ensure the orthodoxy of key policies and doctrines. First, they organized the apostles' writing into a canon. Second, they established relative authority through their idea of apostolic succession, and they educated between differing opinions by establishing a clear church hierarchy. So, first, the church suffered many hardships. Well, before I even get into how they did it, I need to get into the why. So, the church suffered many hardships that led to the formation of the New Testament canon. These include the death of James, Peter, Paul, and eventually the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, and Judaism and Christianity were almost fully and completely divided by AD 85. And the church started making liturgies. This is my first point. After realizing the implications of the beliefs of Marian was spreading, especially among other heresies, they found a need to form an official biblical canon. The oldest known example is known as the Muratorian, and it's often thought of, and although it's often thought that the Old Testament was completely done by the time of the New Testament being written, and it was not actually finalized until after the New Testament. Joseph said that he believed it was because they had, quote, only 22 books, unquote, and, quote, 5 of them, and 5 belonged to Moses, which contained his laws, unquote. Second, the early church sought to establish authority via the idea of apostolic succession. It taught that bishops come directly from Jesus' apostles, and therefore they had the power to confirm, ordain, consecrate, and rule over the clergy and members of the diocese. The origins are from Greco-Roman and Hebrew culture, especially Roman though, because they viewed ancestry as a direct embodiment of the older. It's first definitively known that this was the case from AD 95 when Clement, a bishop of Rome, he said that apostles knew they would need successors, end quote, and afterwards added the further provision that if they should die, other approved men should succeed to their ministry, end quote. And Tertullian seemed to agree with him. Third, the early church worked to educate between different opinions through the use of a clearer church hierarchy. It started with deacons, but soon it became far too much work for just them. Eventually, they got subordinates, but they hardly had a true hierarchy. Based upon Paul's church plan, they eventually formed one based on Paul's church planting system, and it was built starting around 110 AD. There was some friction with starting, though, especially with smaller congregations who did not need such things. Only when the three-level structure emerged did the clergy become a true profession. There was still very little organization in it, though. Eventually, they turned to Rome, though. Quote, "Let us honor the Apostle Peter by having those who have given the judgment right to Julius, Bishop of Rome," unquote, was the conclusion of the Council of Sardica. So, although we often tend to think of the early church as being quite obvious in retrospect on how they dealt with apostles' death, it was very difficult, and there were many things that they had to find to make it clear, including organizing the apostles' writings into a canon, establishing a definitive definitive relative authority through the ideas of apostolic succession, and start educating between the different opinions by establishing a clearer church hierarchy. Thank you.